Welcome to the Westside Barbell Podcast. We're here today with Ashley Jones and, of course, with Louie Simmons. Ashley, I'd like to welcome you here today at Westside. I think for our listeners, could you just give us a brief bio on your background and who you've worked with, all the people you've worked with in rugby, if you can fit it in?
Well, it's basically just been working in rugby for primarily for the last 15 years in Australia, New Zealand, Japan, and in Scotland. Prior to that, I was probably working more in rugby league and basketball, but primarily now it's just rugby over the last 15 years.
What's the biggest things you've picked up along the way, you think?
I think the biggest things I picked up was when I first opened Powerlifting USA back in the mid-'80s, before I was even a professional coach. And that's when I first got my experience of the writings of you, Louie, and it was probably another 10 years before I could actually put it into practice with a professional rugby league team back then. And I think a lot of people have sort of based a lot of their programs on the successful principles of Westside. But I think they, as Woody Harrelson once said, I think they listen but don't hear. And I think that's the biggest problem with people trying to use the Westside principles and all the information they get from everyone. They want to hear something different than what's actually being said.
How did you get into strength conditioning?
I was a junior rugby player. I think I matured early and had some success at age group status because primarily I was probably bigger than most kids, probably dumber than most kids, and wasn't afraid to put my head in dark places and get it knocked around a wee bit, as you can probably tell. And from there, I sort of was become the bit of the runt of the litter as people got a little bit bigger and stronger than I did. So I took to strength training when I was 15, my first gym, American Health Spa down in Brookvale, a suburb of Sydney. And because I started having shoulder injuries and things like that, I got the shoulders of a black snake, as you can probably tell. They're not the widest, strongest shoulders in the world. And thought the only way that I could be a part of rugby anymore was to go on to the training and the strength side of things. So that basically got me started in the industry, and then wanted to learn more and more, so I decided to go to teachers college, which back in that day was the only way you could actually be associated with sports, was to become a phys ed teacher at high school. And then my first day at the library in 1980, when I first started teachers college, when I went into the journal, opened the Journal of Strength and Conditioning from the NSCA, which was only just 2 years old itself at that stage back in 1980. And after reading the first couple of pages, I was hooked, and that was what I wanted to spend the rest of my life doing.
You had mentioned that you cut your teeth earlier with Nautilus.
Yes.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, my first job was in 1979. So this year I'm celebrating 40 years in the industry, whether it's fitness or sports. And got funny story because I was starting university and I was training at Nautilus, and that was the new big thing associated with professional sports in Australia in that stage. And the owner came up to me one day and said, "What are you doing for money while you're at uni?" And I thought he was going to start asking me to pay full-time dues, because at that stage I was on student rates. And I said, "Oh no, I don't have a job at all," but I was working part-time jobs in night packing in stores, in grocery stores and things like that. So. And then he said, "Oh, do you want a job?" And so he offered me a job as an instructor, and basically immersed myself in the whole Nautilus culture and the whole Nautilus bulletins and everything Arthur wrote, originally again in Iron Man magazine this time. So between Iron Man magazine, the old Iron Man owned by Peary and Mabel Raider, before it was taken over by John Ballack and turned into softcore porn, and basically Powerlifting USA and your columns, they were my education. I just went to college to get the diploma. But my education was basically those two magazines and training. So it's nice to be able to sort of be involved now and finally meet you face to face.
How did you get introduced to Powerlifting USA?
There was a news agency down the road from the gym where I started training, and I'd always gone in there and just picked up Ironman. I sort of pestered the owner of the news agency to make sure it was almost air freighted back in those days, so it was there every every month. And then one day they happened to get in Powerlifting USA and started flicking through it. And I think the biggest thing that attracted me was what we were talking about yesterday, was the fact that there was a list of the top 100 or top 50 performers in different classes and things like that. And so straight away I was like, and I guess I was only 15, 16 years of age, and the one thing you want to do is to see how good you are compared to the best. And straight away saying, well, I'm benching this, I'm deadlifting this, I'm squatting this, but shit, I'm a long way away from being anything on that list, and that gave me the motivation to keep training hard.
Even Powerlifting USA gave me great motivation. It used to be Powerlifting News before that, Dan DeWitt, and then Powerlifting USA came out. Like we're talking about, I mean, it wasn't like today with the social media. You waited a year to see your class, and it was a big deal to see where you were.
Exactly.
And you trained your ass off to be as high as you could. And if you got a picture in that magazine, it was like, oh my God, it was tremendous.
Oh,
it gave you enough inspiration to train for another year.
Yeah, exactly right. I mean, and I was never going to be anything in powerlifting because I'm as weak as a kitten, and that's probably doing a kitten a disservice. But just to be able to read the articles and to get the information firsthand and saying, well, let's try this for a wee while and see what works. And I think, obviously, being a wee bit older, back in those days, you sort of stuck at things for as long as it took to find out if it worked or not. Mm-hmm. Now, you sort of people become sort of jump from one program to another program, and this one didn't work for 2 weeks. I'm going to try this one. I'll try Westside, but I don't really know what it's really about. And next week I'll try 5-3-1, and next week I'll try some sort of block system or look at something else. So I think just stick with something for a period of time to actually know if it works or not.
Yeah, you got to stick with it. I mean, actually, I think our claim to fame, we had programs that actually worked, and when we broke so many world records, we can prove it. And, you know, we've always improved. As you notice, things changed. Yeah. The percentages has changed and the workloads changed. And, of course, we've always come up with new exercises. And Tom realized when he came here, to stimulate a gym, you have to have a new person, a new exercise, or a new method. Mm-hmm. And that's what will keep a gym going and making progress. You know, that in competitions at the gym.
I think, yeah, when you look at the old Bulgarian lifting system where you had 3 or 4 guys in the one weight class and they could all be world champion. And then 4 weeks prior to selection, they'd just basically go at it head to head on the platform. And they might have lost 1 or 2 in the battles, but whoever they took, they knew they were going to win the world championship with them.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly right.
It's all competition.
Yeah, that's what. Yep, you're definitely right. Everything rises to the top.
Yep.
Talent will rise just like anything else.
So I was always excited to. I'd be counting down the months, so the days of the month until the next copies of either both those magazines came out, so I could actually see what the people were doing next. Mm-hmm. That was pretty exciting days.
Yeah.
For rugby, from when you started to where you're at now, how did you organize your training and how did it evolve through your years of experience?
Tell you the truth, there's still a lot of things I would have done back 15 years ago that I'm still doing because it works. I mean, you don't get rid of shit because it don't work.
Yeah.
You concentrate on pulling out the good things, and I think one thing that teaching gave me was communication and organization, and anything else I can learn. I can call someone up. I can read something to give me some other information, but organization, and I think it's more or less it's getting normal people to do not normal things.
Abnormal.
And I mean, no one wants to be normal.
That's right.
But most of these people are just normal people. So, I mean, it takes a special kind of crazy to do crazy things. Mm. And I think you said yesterday, or someone else said, was desperate people do desperate things. Mm. So to be the best, you've got to basically experiment. And I've tried to experiment as much as possible on myself with every program before I give it to the players I'll be working with. And obviously I've undergone a lot of training over the years, and I think it's important for strength and conditioning coaches, young strength and conditioning coaches, to basically spend some time under the bar and see what works. I mean, if you don't train, you don't know.
Yeah, you have to take groups and do experiments with them.
Mm-hmm.
And I told, I've always said take your worst guys, experiment with those, and your very best guys, because the middle guys will always be the middle.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Bad people will never become good people, but good people can become bad athletes if you let them train together.
Yeah, that's pretty true.
It happens very fast, and that's why you just have to weed them out and not have any. In our situation, it's always been experiments with first. When we started the Soviet stuff in '82, it was experiments with the percentages and the loadings and the intensities, and of course, physics and mathematics they never change.
Yep, exactly.
Biomechanics in our sport, everyone's sport has biomechanics. They have to follow those very tightly, and that's what I've noticed. But through the years, I've always had groups that, experiment with change. No big deal, they did it, and then for a year and a half, then we wrote about it, and then experiment with bands. Like I said, finding the correct percentages, and it always come up just like the Russian said it was.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's the thing. I tell people, I said, you can screw around for 2 years, and you're going to figure out that I'm right.
Right.
And don't do, what I done was I read the charts, I did it, and I found out it worked, and I took them for the word because you can't have that many strong guys in that many sports without it not working.
Because I think the biggest thing I've done really to enforce things like that is that you can't go wrong with strong.
Yeah.
And I think that injury prevention is all about being as strong as you possibly can be, and that's going to ward off a lot of situations as far as rugby is concerned. And I think rugby originally spent probably far too much time in the aerobic development, and they didn't spend enough time on strength and power. And I was fortunate that I spent 5 years in the National Rugby League in Australia, which is in those days had an unlimited interchange rule. So it was like running players on and off the field, but as a continuous game. So it was like American football, but your offense and defensive players were changing on a regular basis. I mean, we averaged my last year, which was 2000 in that particular sport, we averaged 42 interchanges a game in 80 minutes. So sometimes you didn't even need to have a player go longer than 45 seconds on the field before you replaced him. So it was all about a bit of lactate tolerance. It was all about being strong and being fast and being powerful. And when I came out of that system and then moved across into rugby in 2003, they already had a massive aerobic development, this particular team. And I was really fortunate in that I had two players that were generational players in that squad that I worked with first, and one was Richie McCaw, the former All Black captain, and one was Daniel Carter, one of the greatest point-scoring machines of all time in rugby. So irrespective of what I did, this team was going to win probably 80% of the games just on those two players alone, let alone who else was around them. But the thing that I think was lacking was strength, speed, and power. So I was really fortunate to come into an environment that already had an established aerobic base. All I had to do was maintain that aerobic base, which is so much easier to do than build in the first place. Right. But I had to spend all my time working on strength, speed, and power. And that worked wonders as far as the system was concerned and the way they performed.
People don't understand, but in a sport like that, you build up your VO2 max basically 12 to 18 months with top athletes, and then it doesn't go anywhere else.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And that's the problem with American football. They do too much, like I said, aerobic instead of anaerobic.
Yeah.
The game is short interval plays. Ohio State, I talked to their head strength coach, Mickey Marotti, and he told me that the average play is 18 seconds. They tried to stride. Because the faster, of course, the offense could run those plays, it gives the defense less time to get on the field. They can keep their defensive changes. They can't let them on the field. And that's how they try to win ball games. Okay. But, strategy like that.
Yeah. Which requires, obviously, a level of conditioning, but it has to be so much more explosive and powerful. And I think I arrived at the right time with the slight rule changes in rugby at the time. I mean, most programs in a particular sport, you can probably maintain them for a period of time unless you have a significant rule change. I mean, in rugby league, they changed the distance the two teams had to be apart from 5 to 10, and that greatly increased the demands on the players. So they had to actually train better methods. Rugby has now certain rule changes. You have to tackle now around nipple height. You can't go above nipple height anymore. That's to minimise the risk of a concussion taking place. So again, there's more of an upper body wrestle, I think, will introduce itself into rugby. So we have to change over the emphasis and sort of integrate more of that standing wrestling than on the ground wrestling. So it's a lot more upper body lactate endurance sort of capacities that we have to look at now as far as training is concerned. But the elements that start everything is definition of strength. Strength underpins all other biomotor qualities. So if they're not strong enough, they're not going to be able to do anything else down the track. And I think that's probably where we're pushing more and more so. And also looking at specifics as far as looking at horizontal strength as much as we look at vertical strength. And that's obviously the use of a sled or a prowler are the two vital ingredients that we've probably added to the programs over the last probably 10 years, I'd say.
Yeah, I tell people a prowler, a sled, and a wheelbarrow.
Yeah.
You cannot beat them. If you want to kick someone's butt,
Yeah.
you cannot beat them.
Yeah, because I think strongman is going to come more and more into play too.
Probably.
I think rugby is tailor-made to strongman type training because it's more of that. It's not that, like obviously Westside was originally developed for powerlifting. Strongman has that semi-endurance capacity within that.
Yep.
So a blend of the both has got to be a much better environment for a team sport athlete like rugby.
I know Danny DiPasquale of the Melbourne Storm, he was talking to us, and we recommended he get wrestlers. So in the off-season, he had wrestlers work with him. He said he had a couple of injuries, but during the season, injury rate went way down, way down.
Yeah, it's all about that preparation phase to begin with, and then they're good to go. Yeah.
No detraining.
No, exactly. Yeah.
Athletes, can't take vacations.
No.
They train, travel, and compete.
Yep.
Now, I mean, it's hard to get through some people's heads.
Yeah.
Could you briefly take us through how you organize your weight room in terms of, did you train players via strength or via groups? And then what would be a typical week for out of competition training?
Out of competition, I think we tend to go more to a 4-day week. But I also believe that some players don't need a 4-day week. They believe they could get by on a split program, a full body program 3 days a week. Again, depending, it's all about needs-based as far as I'm concerned. And I try and group players, particularly in the off-season, primarily on needs demands. So whether it's going to be a maximal strength group, more of a size orientation group that they need to top up a wee bit on their upper body mass, particularly. A lower body mass, I'm not concerned about. I'm more concerned about strength and power in the lower body. More a metabolic type group for the overfat player coming in, which will be more circuit based in general, and more an explosive type group. So there could be probably 4 subgroups, and it's more needs, it's not position. So I don't care if it's like a winger or basically a wide receiver in American football. If they're carrying a little bit of extra padding, and it's not preferential padding, they'll go into a metabolic group for a wee while. And no one wants to be in a metabolic group because they're going to get their ass kicked 5 days a week with circuits and some higher rep work and other activities. They're going to be on the prowler a hell of a lot more as far as a conditioning tool rather than a pure power tool. But and that will probably stay fairly solid for the full 4 to 6 week of our off-season program. One of our biggest problem is getting an extended period of time which we can devote primarily to physical preparation, because it's just the integration of skills, the integration of aerobic conditioning top-up, the speed training elements. I would say the 4-day – I used to do a 5-day work week in off-season originally, but the competition was a lot shorter back in those days, and it wasn't split. There was a period of time that we just went straight through 16 weeks straight and basically were done and dusted in 4 months. But now there's which I think will change again shortly because the change in the seasons. But there has been a break for the international window in June of each year, so the season will go into a bit of hiatus while the internationals are on. They'll come back and finish off the season, so they don't necessarily have to start red hot. They can actually build the fitness which is specific to the game as they're going through. So they don't need to come into the season more or less primed, or even to the extent where they're overreached. And the first couple of weeks you taper and then come back into it. But I think they can gradually build. So And a lot of that, particularly that period of time which is dedicated to preparation, you have none of your best players there anyway, because they're off with the international team in their November, and then they get their break over December. So you don't have your best players to do your best work with.
Mm-hmm.
So you're really developing the next generation of players in that program over that period of time.
When you do your circuit training, how often do you change the sequence of exercises? You don't change them fairly often?
Probably often, yeah. Yeah, probably every week.
I
Yeah.
think that's a mistake. A lot of people do circuits, they do the very same sequence all the time, and it should be changed. And also rest periods, changing the rest periods.
Yeah, I took a lot of, probably Istvan Javorek's original circuits, probably Alwyn Cosgrove's original circuits and then looked at repackaging them. And I guess the Beastly circuit came out of that, which was, that were probably our go-to is the Beastly, where you do 6 exercises, 6 reps, 6 sets through, and a blast of cardiovascular work at the end of each 6 exercise circuit. So they'll probably do, probably the most popular one that we've used a lot of was deadlift from the floor into hang clean, into push press, into front squat, into bent over row, into Romanian deadlift. And then jump on either a rowing machine and row 250 metres as fast as you possibly can, or jump on a ski erg and do 250 metres, or jump on what else would you? A skipping rope or a prowler or whatever, and do that for a certain period of time, and then go straight back into the circuit again.
But you do that at the end?
Yeah, at the end of the session.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
If it's more a metabolic strength, I really emphasize, like I want to prioritize that. I'll put that first for 1 or 2 sessions in the week, so they get that hit first, then they finish off with some strength work. I really like what Joe Ken says about it's really easy to be strong, explosive, and powerful in the first minute of a football game, but you also need to be strong, powerful, and explosive in the final minute of the game itself. So by interspersing them across the board, you're actually going to get a much better, well-rounded rugby athlete.
Yeah. You know, in the beginning of any game or any fight, you don't endorse plays no rule, only at the end.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So it's hard, you have to train a certain specific strength, and only by itself. And like how you're doing the cardio more at the end, that's very good.
I think it's also looking at. I guess I got this more from Polican when he was sort of giving seminars in Australia back in the late 80s. Was that pathway from the highest neural demand to the lowest neural demand is how you want to work through a sequence. But I guess that was my original thoughts. But then sort of thinking more and more in rugby is a real mongrel dog sport. There's no purists. I mean, you've got to be strong, but you've also got to be quite a good level of endurance, but you've got to also be explosive and powerful, and you've got to be quite agile as well. So a lot of those, even though sometimes they're all competing athletic training measures, so you can't afford necessarily to go in that semi-linear progression. You've got to mix them all up.
So you've trained at a lot of different countries. Ethnic backgrounds have a lot to do with how you train your athletes?
Yeah, I think probably more so when you go to the non-English speaking countries, particularly Japan. Japan, for me, was a huge eye-opener in how I train people, because they've got such a tradition of warrior spirit in the first place. So they know they're not going to lack determination and their hard work ethos. I think one of the biggest things in Japan is pulling people back, and not and also getting them to stop doing junk training, and being more specific and intense training, which is the biggest thing with Japanese. Because I think you look at the Japanese work ethos, it's about, if you and I are at our desks and I'm at my desk longer and you decide to go home, I'm the one who's considered the better employee. Even though you might have done better work in a shorter period of time, if I'm there longer than you, I'm going to be respected more. So that's how they take it on the playing field as well. In the past, I think it's changing now because they're getting more into the intensity of the session, and obviously, if it's intense, it can't go long. And that's the biggest thing I found with Japanese culture, is trying to integrate their work ethic without cooking them in the process.
Yeah.
And when you talk to the Scots, have got a great history of obviously Highland Games and various stone lifting. So again, that's a cultural element that if you can breed some of that into the training programs, if you can have a little bit of a Highland Games theme in some things, I think you can get some benefits out of that.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously Samoa is a warrior culture as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it's pretty easy to have that those identities formulated within training programs and to stimulate their thinking as far as training is concerned easily. Yeah.
Yeah. So you're very flexible as a coach.
Very.
That's what makes a coach.
Very flexible.
Yes.
I think you have to be.
Some people are not flexible.
Well, I think rigidity builds. If you're rigid, you break.
That's right. Stillness.
If it's
right.
bamboo, it's still strong. So I think I identify more with the bamboo in that it's very hard to break bamboo.
Mm-hmm.
So if your integrity and your principles of idea and what you want it to do is strong, it will blow and it'll bend, and then it'll bounce back to exactly where it was.
Mm-hmm.
So you might have to make a few compromises with a head coach or certain individuals, but you'll never break your own principles, and you'll always bounce back, and then you also whip as well.
Yeah.
When you need to.
If you break your own principles, then you're no longer a coach.
Exactly. You end up basically, well, you might as well stop trying.
That's right. You're just a maintenance worker.
Yeah, exactly. In some places I've been, you sometimes feel that you're basically a slave to the head coach.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why sometimes you decide, I've got to go.
Yep.
This is no longer good for me as a person.
I think that happens a lot here in American football.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know why head coaches think they would know more about weight training than the weight coach, but that's the way it goes, you know.
Yeah. It's a dangerous thing.
And they're paying the bills.
Yeah.
They're doing the hiring and the firing.
With I've got two questions. The first one is on the different cultures you've experienced. Were you able to bring parts of each little bit of culture that you've encountered into each weight room you're in, or was there common denominators between them all, or was each culture separate in terms of how they approach training?
I think I would bring exactly the same things to each weight room, but then I would tend to look at the culture and how that can be integrated within the weight room program. And I mean, some in environments love that competitive, combated environment where I'm going, if you and I are paired together, we're basically not going to give up until one of us taps out. And that's going to breed a better, stronger environment. Whereas Australia wasn't like that when I was with the Wallabies. It wasn't that same one-on-one competition involved because you didn't want to appear better than the next person. It was more a more socialized that everyone should be around the same level. So no one sort of pushed. And I know some guys were as strong as anything I've ever seen, but they didn't want to show it because it showed up their teammates. So it was like, how do I get the best to rise and incentivize and things like that, and to get that to work. And that was a tough gig in Australia. But and in I think Scotland and Japan were my easiest gigs by far, because they have a history of hard work, and it was just channeling that in the right direction, which was the important thing. And to give some of them a little bit more free rein, because I tend to be quite laissez-faire when I'm coaching. The younger training ages, I tend to be more dictatorial with, because they don't know, and they haven't earned the right to actually voice their own opinion in the training. But as they develop, they get more and more say in how the program is, and the program is a living, breathing document with those guys, where they tend to move from a pure dictatorial, and then after a period of time, they move more into what exercises do you think work for you? So rather than me prescribe, say, this particular pressing exercise, and that takes time, as you will know with your strength is the overcoming of weaknesses comment that you've made over the years. So that if you don't know what your weaknesses are and what exercise works best, you've got years to work them out. And the exercise that you might do to stimulate improvements in your hamstrings might be different to the ones I choose to stimulate exactly the same area.
Or when to do them.
Yeah. And your lever length's going to be different than my lever length, so they're going to totally change.
Right.
So we need to find what that is. And then development after that, my next step is to say, well, do you really need to do 4 sessions a week? If strength is not your major prioritization, can we slip more like a technical skill session that's going to make you a better rugby player? Because I ain't building strength athletes, whereas you're building strength athletes. I'm building rugby players who utilize your systems and your ideas to be better rugby players.
Yeah.
And my final step in the thing is that I stopped doing a programmer almost, because I'm going to let you program for you, but I'm always going to be in the weight room to correct your technique,
oversee,
to make sure you don't injure yourself, to oversee the program. And you might say, Ash, do you think this will work? I said, well, let's try it. And I said, yeah, I think there's a big chance it'll work. But let's give it a go. So that's the goal for me, to be in a program to do that.
The key in any sport, even as simple as ours, you have to learn technique. You have to learn to do it right, because if you don't do it right, you don't know when you're doing it wrong.
Yeah.
Then you're stuck. Do you have a lot of trouble with, everybody talks about the today's athletes, the younger athletes. You have trouble adjusting to how they think compared to how it was 25 years ago. My athletes are totally different 25 years ago.
Yeah, I think these days that people look at things differently, and obviously they want instant results, and if the program doesn't give them instant results, they want to try something else. I think that's probably the biggest thing I found, that people aren't prepared to. They still work hard, but they work hard in their own different ways. And whereas we would say from our generations, we'd more say, stick with it until you 100% think that's no longer going to do some work. It's going to work for you. Then maybe change, or change an element within that. Don't change everything. But a lot of these people now will basically throw everything out and then try and do something else rather than persevere with the one program for an extended period of time. But I think I made a comment to Tom, and I think you may have been there at the time yesterday, that I read a great quote not long ago, was that for every decade that we age as coaches, we still coach, in particular in rugby, a 23 to 28-year-old person. So it's not necessarily the athlete that has to change, that we have to change as coaches to ensure that we stay current and our currency is maintained within the program that we're actually working with. Because to paraphrase the Shawshank Redemption, if you either get busy learning or you get busy dying. and you've been learning and changing things for 30, 40 years.
Constantly. It has to constantly change. The earth changed, everything changed, people changed. So, sometimes you have to adjust to different people, and absolutely. And like it sounds like you're really on track how we train. It's just ours is a lot more one-dimensional.
Yeah, I think that's the thing I learned very early, in that if you want to get someone strong, who is the strongest people on the planet, and see how they train. So who are the strongest powerlifters? Who are the strongest people? They're a combination of strongmen, Olympic lifters, and powerlifters. Right? Who's writing the best programs? Well, Westside's been on top for a long time. Let's see what they've got, and then delve into it and break it down and say, well, for example, the box squat, which no one understands properly.
Yeah.
How to use the box squat in training for non-powerlifters.
We were just talking yesterday, I believe, about shin angle touching ground when running. It's the same as the box squat. No one thinks like this.
Yeah, it's a negative shin angle, which is the key to running fast, which is the key to box squatting. Yeah. And it's sitting back. And one thing that we found additional to the reasons why you advocate box squatting is that particularly for prop forwards, in the scrummage, when people engage, the referee will decide when the teams engage. So by sitting on a box or sitting back on a box, maintaining body tension, it's just like before you engage in a scrum. So it could be a 3-second hold. It could be maybe as long as a 5-second hold. So by varying the holds on the box, you can replicate that and transition that into more applicable to the actual sport itself.
So you found that you can prolong reversible strength.
Yeah.
That's what I preached for years and years and years. Why American football should do it.
Well, I mean, obviously the strength reflex starts to diminish the longer the hold is.
Of course.
But then you've got that explosion off the box, and the angle which you're projecting is just where you're going to almost engage it.
Too many people confuse plyometric effort with reversible strength. And that's the problem. They need to really think. I said a long time ago, I could stay down for 8 seconds and get up with 485 pounds of bar weight and 375 pound of band in 0.6 meters per second. Dave Tate was much faster than me, but he was much more explosive, larger. And you sit on a box, you have deformation. When you're on the ground, you have only deformation of your feet. But when you sit on a box, you have deformation of your hamstring, glutes, and hips. And no one even considers that. That's why the greatest squatters are box squatters, and they squat wide.
Yeah. So by integrating all those, and then say, right, okay, in the program, strength training for rugby is easy. Strength and conditioning for rugby is bigger, stronger, faster. I mean, so you want to go to the people who make people the strongest, the fastest, and I would say I wouldn't say the biggest anymore, it'd be the fittest.
Big and strong, strong and strong.
Yeah, and then obviously they all interact with each other. And it's then, as Tom just asked, how do you integrate them into a system? It's like them with skills on top of it as well. So we'll often go from speed into the gym. So the speed will act as a primer for the gym, and obviously we want to try and hit speed when we're most recovered. So speed on a Monday morning in the off season when we've had the weekend off, and then we usually have a Wednesday off, and then we hit the speed again on Thursday. So we have that completely rested state. And I think the biggest issue still we face in rugby is about recovery. How to recover the best, because again, the ability to train is governed by the ability to recover. And if you're not recovering, you can't express strength, you can't develop strength if you're not fully recovered to go again.
I think LeBron James, he's finally had an injury after all these years, but I've heard that he spends close to $500,000 on restoration methods in a year.
Wow.
Same with James Harrison.
Yeah.
Spend $1,000 a day at least.
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, those are two phenomenal athletes. LeBron will probably get down as the greatest basketball player ever lived. Many would say, including me, but it's unbelievable.
So then you just integrate them all and just see what works and constantly tinker and change and make sure you stay on top. And,
we were saying the other day, because too many coaches and people, it does, like my friend Sakari said, it does no good to be strong in the wrong exercise.
Yeah.
You have to look, like you said, what you lack and work on what you lack.
Well, I think the other thing, because I've had players that, particularly in one program where the best was squatting 273 kilos in rugby, which is a pretty acceptable squat in a non-strength sport. But unfortunately, he had the inability to stay in a position in a scrum. So if you add sleds, prowlers to that horizontal displacement, because for me, all sport's tangential. There's components of vertical, there's components of horizontal. And if we combine them in the right orders, we get a great tangential force being developed. So we have to be strong vertically. It's all about ground reaction forces. But we have to be able to channel that into a horizontal component as well. So by use of sleds and prowlers, we get the best mix in all environments, and we can use them either for conditioning elements or we can use them for strength and power elements.
It's so funny because overseas sleds, they've been using sleds since, I don't know when, probably 1950, but everyone thinks it's revolutionary. We started doing a lot of sleds, and now you see sleds over in America. I mean, it started right out of our place. And it's just amazing to me that, but more people should do sleds.
Exactly. I mean, it's amazing.
You cannot beat it.
Yeah.
It just looks too simple.
Yeah. Well, I think that's it. I mean, I've got a big thing on simplicity at the moment. And I think a dear friend of mine from Australia in years gone by said that people complicate the profit because there's actually no money in simplicity. And it's a simple job. It's a simple job. You prove that week in, week out by basically producing record holders, by working damn hard on the simple basics.
Mm-hmm.
And that eludes a lot of people.
Position.
Mm-hmm.
Ours was all about position, like you said in your scrum. You have to have position. Work on position. People don't even understand that.
Yeah.
They don't understand the meaning of it.
Mm.
I got a question on international and club. I've always wanted to know, how do you work with that when you have some cultures like the All Blacks, where the country, that's the big thing, being a New Zealander, but then you've got club duties, and then other cultures, clubs are just as important. How do you work around that as a strength coach, or can you?
Yeah, that's the conundrum. Because working in New Zealand, I think is, and I've been on both sides of the coin. I've been an international coach that's been going to see the strength and conditioning coach of the club and saying, we need this player to be a lot stronger through his posterior chain. And if they're on the same page as you are, they will accept that. New Zealand's a lot easier because it's all about making sure that New Zealand is the best rugby team in the world. When you're with a team like Samoa, only in the last tour that we did in November, we had a squad of, say, 30, 31 or 32. We only had 2 island-based players. All the other 29, 30 players lived and played their rugby in Europe or in Australia or New Zealand. So to try and coordinate all those different training programs becomes more a communication issue between the head of strength and conditioning of Samoan rugby and the head of strength and conditioning for Cardiff or Northampton or anywhere else in Europe. So it becomes a lot more difficult. So you're relying on the strength and conditioning coaches that are definitely outside your control to give you a product that you can actually work at an international level. Australia tends to be more similar to that, in that the clubs are focused on achieving success for themselves. And then you only have, and what I did when I was with the Australian team was primarily try and run the programs of the franchises at the national level, because you've got them for such a short period of time that you might as well continue the program that they're currently doing. And you might have 5 different programs operating with 5 different franchises, but to try and to add a little bit of value where you can, but to not try and discombobulate the program by changing things. So trying to add a little bit, but trying to maintain the 80% that they're actually currently on. In Scotland, there's only 2 pro teams in Scotland, so it's easy to control that environment, whereas a few players work outside of the Scottish system. But I would say Scotland and New Zealand were probably the 2 easiest environments to get a good linkage between club and country. The other 2 environments were really, really difficult. And it's just trying to cope with that when you're on tour. But easy when you're with the other 2.
What was it like? I think everyone would want to know, being a strength coach with the All Blacks. Like, what, before you got there, walking in to your expectations, thinking of, and then the expectations been there. Like, what was that like?
Well, I started with Canterbury, and then we moved into the Crusaders before I had the honour of being an All Black. And I mean, in 2002, I think 2003, the All Blacks were actually nicknamed the Red and Black All Blacks, because they had so many of the Crusader players in the All Black team. And when you walk into the Crusader locker room at various years gone by, there'd be probably 1 to 15 would have been All Blacks. So I really had an All Black environment. So walking into the All Blacks was basically not, this is going to sound trite, but not such a big deal, because I'd been working with All Blacks for the previous year, 18 months with the Canterbury and the Crusader players. So, but then you get the best of the other franchises. And it just changes your entire attitude to when you play those guys, because they then become brothers.
Yeah.
And it's such a, I mean, it's probably overstated, but it is a brotherhood. Everyone will basically be a part of a team of teams in that environment. So they might be a Hurricane, or they might be a Highlander or a Blue or a Chief, But when they put a black jersey on, obviously we all become one.
Is that one of the very few sports that actually do that? Combine teams? And you're not going to see the Chicago Bears suit up with the Cleveland Browns.
Nah, I guess unless
They're going to play each other.
Yeah, listen. Yeah, there's probably other team sports that would do that. Rugby league does, obviously.
What's the advantage of it?
You're getting the best of the best to come together as one unit. Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the team is selected,
but they never form a team.
They form a team to play the internationals. Yeah.
Oh, internationals. Okay, all right.
Internationals, not club. The internationals.
Oh, I got you.
Yeah. So they'll pull from everywhere, and again, they're the best of the best.
It's like an all-star baseball team. I take it over here.
Yeah.
Okay, all-star basketball. Got you.
Yeah, and they'll play at the international level, and then suddenly, and when you come and play them as your club, it's like, g'day, how you going? Sort of thing. It's like you're still going to go into battle hard and fierce, but if you see the guys with each other before the game, it's like long lost brothers, arms around each other and saying what you've been up to and all that sort of stuff. Then bang. And I think you see it a little bit more in playoffs here in American football. Like some of the comings together of those players on the weekend, the ones that had been knocked out. It was heartfelt in some of those situations.
Playing each other since they're 6 years old.
Yeah, going head to head.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The McDonald's All-Stars of basketball and all these, they've known each other forever. Matter of fact, the quarterback had just left, at 8 years old. He was here at Ohio State at a camp, and he said he was going to come to Ohio State and be the quarterback. And he just come and broke all through 50 passes, 50 touchdowns this year. It's pretty amazing. 8-year-old kid saying he's going to come here and do that, and he did it.
He did it, yeah.
And he'll make it in the pros, too. He can play football.
Do you think, I know New Zealand's got a lot of things going but that culture is the bedrock of what sets them apart from everybody else? Yeah,
I think so. I mean, if the book Legacy, written by James Kerr, I think it's James Kerr, is an outstanding book, and I would really push on every team to have a copy of that as a reference. And I was really fortunate to be involved with that team for 3 years, and everything in that book is 100% accurate. There's no embellishment. There's not one bit of bullshit in the entire book. It's all what happens on a day-to-day basis. And it's all about humility. It's all about leaving the place in a better place when you arrive. It's all about sweeping the sheds. It's everything that's said there is more or less what basically goes on. Because no one's above the team. And it becomes that tight unity. I mean, I've never, unfortunately, yet had the ability to, the chance to actually visit like elite special forces unit and just talk to some of the guys that are like that. And that's what I envisage them to be, is they come from disparate backgrounds, organizations, states, whatever, but they are molded for one particular purpose, is to finish the mission. And that's what that team is. That's what the All Black is, to finish the mission. And the mission is long-term to win the World Cup and hopefully to three-peat this year in 2019. Which is amazing, yeah.
Over your time, you must have come across a lot of interns in and out. What do you think is the biggest mistakes interns have made or still do make when they come?
Surprisingly, I haven't had that many. I think it's a real modern thing for more and more people to be interns. I mean, I've had the fortunate, I had a really great, it wasn't even called an intern back then, it was called a performance placement. And so it's technically an intern now. And he said that he needed to spend 100 hours with me as part of his degree. And he ended up spending 1,000 hours with me and we're now close personal friends. And he's now head of physical performance for Fiji Rugby Union. So Damien Marsh is his name. One of the most excellent strength and conditioning coaches coming out of the Australian system. So, but I think the ones I have had is they expect to do more than they currently are capable of doing. I was saying to Tom earlier that years ago I had one guy turn up, and on day one he basically looked, and at the end of the day he come up to me and said, I'll be doing a speed session with a small group of players tomorrow. And I said, you won't be doing a session with anyone tomorrow. You'll be watching and learning, and please ask as many questions. And I think that's the big one. I mean, the ones that I have had, it's like I say, catch me if I've got a spare moment, but make sure you walk around with a notepad and a pen and just jot down your thoughts, your feelings, your questions. And I will give you as much time at the end of the day to try and answer those questions that you ask me. But if you don't have any questions at the end of the day, I'm going to ask you to leave because obviously I can't teach you anything because you know it all.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had some interns, they get to the end of the first day, their first day of involvement in a professional rugby environment, are saying, what are you going to ask me? What do you got for me? Oh, no, it's all been pretty straightforward. I said, mate, you're going to have to go. Because if you've got no questions and you've never worked in a professional sporting environment before, you've either been to one of the rarest schools that I've ever come across, or you basically think you know a hell of a lot more than you do. So I can't teach you. If that's the attitude you have, I can't teach you.
If a person comes here and even fairly familiar with our program, it takes 10 months to figure the program. 10 months. I think then you start to get a basic idea what you should do and why it works.
Right.
But 10 months.
And the biggest thing I've had some interns that even left.
Oh yeah.
I mean, how can you learn or know what's going through the athletes you're working with if you don't lift or don't experience it?
That's the problem here with us. I mean, I know they're not on the field. They're supposed to be in rugby. Here, I expect them to lift.
Yeah.
So you come here. I mean, we got 132-pound girls, squats over 600 pounds. So what do you do with them? A normal person can't. So that's why, it's up for us to select interns. I feel we got to be tough because they got to be able to actually work out,
Yeah.
That's all. Work out and learn. Like you said, keep your mouth shut, just work out.
Because I think it scares me with the number of interns that are applying for positions that, like at Samoa, we had 125 applications for 2 internships. And we had internships offered and from people saying they're 40 years of age that had wanted to get into rugby. They had no rugby experience. So, and they wanted to get a start. I mean, in my day, it was so much easier. No one wanted to be a strength coach when I was 25, 26. And I knew straight away that's what I wanted to be. But now, it seems like every graduate that comes out of a human movement program, a sports science program, wants to be a strength coach. And wants to work at the highest level, which, that ain't going to happen in a hurry.
No.
Where do you see the future of strength coaches in rugby going?
I think you're getting a disparity now because I think there seems to be 2 different skill sets. One's more in the sports science, GPS, analysis area, and the other's coaching. And very, very few people I've come across over the years, and particularly over the last 5 or 6 years, that have the ability to do both extremely well. I know I'm definitely the coaching side. I don't do the sports science very well at all. But I'm fortunate that programs I've had have had really good sports science people that can break it down and explain it to me, and I can get, okay, right, I get this. Okay, we can do this. People one of the best I've ever seen is Hayden Masters, who's at the Wallabies. I mean, he's one of the brightest coaches who's also great in the sports science area, which is not that they're very, very rare. They're not common. So in that regards, I think there needs to be that area. But some of the sports scientists think they can coach, and it's a totally different skill set. I'm not going to try and tell a sports scientist how to run his shop. I mean, there's a little bit of stay in your lane type mentality. And
theoretical and practical.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. And I think combining a little bit of knowledge about both is great, but you won't be the best at one or the other. I think you have to make a choice.
Of course.
And a lot of that choice comes down to who you are as a person and what your skills are.
In 82, I broke my back a second time during 81. I realized I had to change. I started doing all the subby stuff. I knew I lacked something, and a year later I found out what it was. It was science. And I'm a complete moron, but I study enough to learn enough about science and physics to apply it into our sport, and that's what changed everything.
Right.
I knew weights. I mean, anybody can lift weights and knows what curls and benches are, but it was applying physics and mathematics, and that's what it is. I tell people, all sports are physics, mathematics, and biomechanics.
Yep.
You put all three together, and that's all there is to it.
I think I may have used that quote once or twice.
Well, good. Yeah, that's what I realized.
Yeah.
How do you use the data interpreted from sports science? Do you use it as a feedback mechanism to see if everything's going right? Or do you believe this should be something that dictates your training?
I don't think it ever should dictate your training, but what I have found really, really well over the last few years is that obviously you want to keep the volume of speed work up for individuals over the course of the year, because dropping too far away from what you're averaging is just as bad as doing a jump and a spike in training. So you can have two injury levels associated with both of them. So I think having live GPS, so at the end of a session, I can look at the sports science can tell me who's done what and who do I need to top up. I think that's been, for me, I think a lot of it becomes like, I knew how much they were going to average, what they're going to run. And I think the other side of the thing is trying to help the team coaches stay on track with intensity levels in the training session. So obviously one of the most important things to do in your weekly preparation in season is to work above game pace for a period of time. So the game becomes easier than the practice.
So you have super compensation.
Super compensation, yeah. So, but you need to know what you're working at, and that's where the average meters per minute that you're getting on a live GPS is going to be very, very beneficial. If you can feed that into the coach straight away, and in some teams I've been working with, we'll obviously have headsets on, and we can tell the coach we're at 110 meters per minute. Let's try and maintain that for another 2 or 3 minutes, and then we know when teams, if we have a momentum shift in a game and the opposition team lifts the tempo, we know that we can go with them. But we haven't done that, we're going to get left behind. So I think that's a huge benefit.
Yeah, your opponent dictates training.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Just like weights. The bigger the weights, things change.
Yeah.
Little weights aren't big weights.
Yep. And again, your technique with a maximum strength level is not going to be different. So it's going to be, well, hopefully you're going to keep it maintained fairly closely. In
our sport, the difference between a good lifter and bad lifter, the good lifter can lift the biggest weights with the best technique. And normally people's technique falls off.
Yeah. So you want, in the game situation with us, is to try and maintain that intensity of focus and skills under pressure at high meters per minute, so we transfer it across into a game situation. We're going to basically dominate an opposition.
Tom asked you a question about sports science versus actually coaching, and like I've told people all the time, I recommend a lot of books: Super Training, Practice Science Training, all these books. Not one book tells you how to train. Mm-hmm. That had to come out, and that came out of here,
right? Because
I read those books and applied those and made how you train. I mean, I just basically followed the Russians and the Chinese and the Bulgarians. Yep. Because they all do it. They're similar. The Bulgarians have a lot more maxes based on daily maxes. Yep. So, but that's the only difference. I put all three together and made the Wellside program. Mm-hmm. I took the best of everything. Yep. Like MMA.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, it's like training rugby. You go to the best, take the best, pull the best out of it in order to try and be the best on the field. And I think the successful teams obviously start with very good players. Let's give the athlete the credit in the first and foremost. Sure. But we just can't. We can't stop. That's why I hate the word maintenance. No one maintains. You either get better or you get worse. It's very, very, very difficult to maintain something. So you get the situation where you've been working your ass off all off season, and then suddenly you go into a maintenance mode when you start playing. I mean, those people are going to get weaker, progressively weaker, and increase the risk of injury.
Well, the higher athlete you are, the quicker you lose it.
Yeah.
You got a lot to lose when you're good. You got a little to lose when you're bad.
So just keep working on your strengths.
Yeah.
You got to build your strengths as long as you build your weaknesses at the same time, and make them both up better.
I just found by prolonged training, just like almost like in fighting sports, you do it year after year. Somehow you actually do become better.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you just always get a little bit better just by, just doing the work constantly. Never can't back off of it, though.
It's accumulation over time.
Yeah, it's accumulation training because years ago, before any kind of gear, and I was national record holder in 1971 in the squat.
Mm-hmm.
And right after that was zero gear. I went to 3 meets in a year and a half. I broke my squat record every time, so it's top 10 squat every time. But I never broke my box record in the gym. And that was, but I always thought, how did I do that? It had to be just accumulation. Not only squatting, but good mornings and back raises and deadlifts. And that's what did it. The accumulation and training made me break those records.
Yeah.
And solid
mental strength.
Mental strength.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
One way or the other, I was going to break my record,
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah.
Well, I would just like to thank you.
Well, same here.
Everything you've done for my career and the athletes that I've helped over the years, because I've taken your principles from a very long time ago and attempted to understand 10%, I hope, of it and put it in the right practice. But thank you, and long health and good health to you to keep educating us.
Yeah, you too. It sounds like you're doing a pretty good job.
I'm trying.
And good luck in the future.
Thanks very much. Appreciate it.
Yeah.